Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 90 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I'm joined by Joe Meade. And tonight, Joe, we're going to wrap up the regular season, take a look at the Big Ten tournament bracket, and take a look at the bracketology for the Big Ten teams also. So the viewers on the screen can see us over on the left, the Big Ten standings, the final Big Ten standings, and then the most recent bracketology projection, which was done this morning, and the morning of 3/9. So Sunday morning it was done. But Joe, we've got a couple of games to get to first since our last cast, and Friday night, let's go to first. We had a pretty important one for NCAA tournament seeding, maybe not so much for bubble, but Illinois takes care of business at home by knocking off Purdue. Will Riley had a nice game with 22. All five starters were in double figures. But, Joe, a game that really could have gone either way, and it was Kasparis, Yakashonis, and Illinois who hit the big shots and got across the line.
Yeah, you looked at probably the Instagram reels or the highlight tape, and you would have thought, oh, toward the end, Kasparis took over. I thought it was a really good team effort between Will Riley, Ivisic, Trey White, Kylan Boswell, and really without much bench contribution. I know Humber Kraus hit a few threes, but Purdue outscored Illinois' bench, and that's not something you would have heard and thought that Illinois could have necessarily gotten away with it. I think Illinois was a 4.5 point favorite going into this for a reason. Me and Sean thought that could have been a potential trap, and let's face it, Sean, for 90% of this game, it looked that way. Illinois just took over, and I think this is why Illinois is, for first-time listeners, we've kept saying this. They're a team at a 7 or a potential 6 if they really go far in the Big Ten tournament. No one wants to see, because if this team is tight late, they have plenty of first round talent and just general college basketball talent to pull away. I think Illinois, the way they've played the last week, whether it was the Michigan game, the Purdue game, uh, they're playing more like the team they were, which was a top 10, top 15 team from December to January. So I think this is a really good win for the Illini morale. I think they're probably one of the dark horses in the Big Ten tournament, which we'll preview later. So really good on them. I think Purdue, it's kind of just more of the same as they've been on this slump. I believe this is like 4 of 5 they've lost. Braden Smith plays well. Trey Kaufman-Red plays well. Fletcher Lawyer, I thought, had a pretty good game. Didn't hit any threes, though. And then no one else really stepping up. Caleb First, no points. CJ Cox only getting 7. And then the bench not getting too much either. So I think for Purdue, that kind of performance is good enough against most teams in this conference. But on the road and against kind of the upper tier teams in this league, we really see them struggle of late, and this is more of the same.
Yeah, I'm impressed with Illinois. They're definitely in the ascendancy going into postseason play here. I've got them up to a 6 seed in bracketology, Joe, in the Midwest region, and we can talk about that later. And then they are the 7 seed in the Big Ten tournament, but they have shortened the rotation. Again, really 6 guys for the majority of this game, and while they're a tournament lock, so I think that Illinois should look to get some of their guys some rest in Indianapolis. Maybe you don't have to play them. You can still play them. Maybe limit them at 35 minutes. See if you can get somebody else going. Because Joe, they are going to Indianapolis with not much to gain and everything to lose if one of their big players gets injured. Now that might be a theme that's going around, but for Purdue, again, you have quick math. You have 19 points outside of your big 3. In a game in the 80s, that's not going to be enough. And the formula seems to be there on Purdue. Some teams aren't good enough to execute it, but Purdue is definitely beatable, especially when they're not at home, and they fall all the way to the 6th seed, Joe. That's an interesting thing that we'll get to later, but not all that surprised that Illinois won this game. I thought the line was in Illinois' favor because the analytics had Illinois about 1.5 points. And usually when that happens, the Vegas is right, and they were here. But all right, let's go to Saturday, Joe. We had a really weird one to lead off the day up at the Kohl Center in Wisconsin. It was Penn State, already eliminated from the Big Ten tournament. Penn State, who went up there and knocked them off 86-75. A ton of their seniors, their last college basketball game. But Joe, what a big disappointment for Wisconsin here.
This was the most shocking result of the week, to be honest with you. Even regarding not necessarily results, even blowouts. Um, You'd think Wisconsin get a 19 out of Crown, 19 out of Blackwell, even 13 out of Touch. They had four guys in double figures. I would have thought this would have been a clinical performance from Wisconsin. It was anything but that. Defensively, this is a team that you see this happen, whether it was at Michigan State, which is understandable, or even toward the beginning of the year at times, that just lets up too many points, lets up too many open shots. Penn State shot 57.9 from three. Now, 11 of 19, is that going to happen to Wisconsin every game? I don't think so, but there's a general theme of kind of letting Penn State jack threes, and we've seen Michigan and Michigan State um, being close games with Penn State, but they normally made enough adjustments. For example, when Michigan State played them, they just pulled Jaden Akins on Ace Baldwin and did a lot to limit his game. I didn't see much of that from Wisconsin toward the end at this during this stretch. Now, luckily for Wisconsin, I don't think this is going to completely nuke much. They did lose that double bye, unfortunately for them. But
They still got it. They still got the 4, didn't they?
am I crazy?
Unless UCLA got it, but I thought I saw UCLA got it.
Well,
I'm
as
gonna
I'm
have to
looking
double
into
check.
this, I'm gonna look into that shot. I want your take on this game.
Yeah, like I only watched part of this. It seemed like it was kind of an up and down one early on. And not only was Penn State hanging, but I think they were kind of establishing the tempo of this game. They make some shots. They moved it great. They had 21 assists on 31 makes. That's really good. And Wisconsin with just 11 assists on 25 makes. So not quite the thorough sort of annihilation offensively from Wisconsin that we'll see. But Joe, maybe this is what they needed, a little, kick in the butt before Indianapolis. They've had a couple of these over the years, but this year wasn't really one of those. I mean, they had the home loss to Oregon, which they gave away, but this is the first time they've lost to a non-tournament team since maybe all season, Joe. I'm going back through
I think it's all year. I mean, we've
it is
seen
all
Wisconsin
year.
do this. This has been a theme. Like in 23, the last day of the regular season, they almost lost to Minnesota. They ended up losing to Ohio State in the Big Ten tourney, which cost them the NCAA tournament. And by the way, Sean, it did cost them the double bye.
You're right. The standings were wrong that I was looking at, so I'm gonna have to adjust the Big Ten tournament bracket that we have yet to unveil. But I mean, maybe they don't really need another game, so they will end up playing in the second round on Thursday at 2:30, which is something that they really shouldn't have had to do. But are you more so on the side of that if they can just play another game and win, that they can put this one away pretty easily, or are there some lingering problems in this one?
I'm really gonna have to give a non-answer because if they can't manage to beat a Northwestern team or a Minnesota team, let's be quite frank, Sean. Northwestern's got the coaching; they have some talent left, but it's not the same Northwestern going into the year. In Minnesota, they had some trouble with them at the barn. There's no reason they should have the same amount of trouble on a neutral site. So if I see Wisconsin in a competitive game with any of those teams, I think maybe some red flags are going to come about, and perhaps, like Michigan, there'll be a first round, a popular first round upset pick, for lack of a better term.
I think, Joe, just looking at the Big Ten tournament bracket, that they're going to be tough to beat if they're on extra rest. Just the kind of the fast nature that they play, and I think they really should be able to handle business against whatever non-tournament team they play. But yeah, if they can get through that and then compete with UCLA, I think they're going to be in a good spot going in. Sometimes teams could use something like this just to get them refocused. I mean, look at Michigan State. They lost 3 out of 4, a tough road trip, and then a really unexplainable home loss. Well, that unexplainable home loss to Indiana was the last loss that they had. So let's hope for Wisconsin's sake that this is just a blip on the radar. All right, Joe, I also do have to change the standings because, again, Wisconsin's 4th on there. But we had a couple other games yesterday. Maryland, Northwestern. Maryland was victorious at home, nothing surprising there. And then UCLA pummeled USC. But while I switch this graphic, you want to add anything on those two games?
No, I think UCLA, this is kind of what we've seen ever since the Mick Cronin ran. I think they've been one of the better teams in the conference, Sean. Now, they were clearly out of the title race for a while, but Eric Daly Jr., he's someone I highlighted a lot at the beginning of the year. 25 points, kind of a breakout performance for him. Sky Clark was 17. Um, didn't need much for the bench either, although Adai Mara adds in 14. So I think if UCLA can get this balance correct, that potentially, especially with the double bye, they could be a threat to the Big Ten tournament. USC, I think at times they've been dangerous. I think, they're kind of waiting for the season to end. Barring anything dramatic, I think this is a team that doesn't play great defense. They don't necessarily shoot the three all that well, and aside from Desmond Claude, they have no one who really could game blank. Like Wesley Yates is a good enough player, but besides Claude, if you take him away, St. Thomas, I think, has regressed to a certain extent. I think they're a pretty beatable team, and you don't necessarily need an A or B game to beat them.
All right, well, Joe, we had nothing really surprising there. I think both Maryland and UCLA are going to be popular picks to win the Big Ten tournament with where they stand in the standings. But, Joe, the last game of the day yesterday was a bubble battle between Indiana and Ohio State, and it was an ugly one early on, 29-25 Buckeyes at halftime. A lot of nervous energy out there in the stands and from the players. But it's Trey Galloway and the Hoosiers that get across the line. Indiana kept it within shouting distance despite having their worst field goal percentage shooting day of the season. And then they got that burst from the crowd. They made a couple really nice defensive plays. A couple shots go down, and the Hoosiers find themselves in a really good spot going into the Big Ten tournament. But certainly not the all-time classic that people are going to remember. But Indiana got the W, and that's what was important.
Yeah, Sean. I think one of the turning points of the second half was John Mobley Jr. getting that flagrant one. Whether that was or not, I don't really want to get into because I couldn't even establish a definition from this damn conference after all the no calls or calls I've seen this year. Sean, Ohio State, I think ultimately they're a really good team. I mean that offensively, but at times they kind of just are Bruce Thornton or bust. I know they've drawn up plays late in games for Devin Royal and Micah Parrish. Those plays usually have worked, but the over-reliance on him just going one-on-one, it's not really a Bruce Thornton problem. I think that's more so on Jake Diebler, who
Do we lose you there, Joe?
I
Do we lose you?
Yeah, you still got me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce Thornton, I think, is their best player without a doubt, but kind of the over-reliance on him late in games when they don't draw plays for a Royal or a Parrish is really starting to show. And I think John Mobley's a heck of a shooter, but him just jacking threes at times is ending up costing them a lot of good possessions. So for a team that doesn't rebound all that well, that's potentially something to look at. I think as they play Iowa early into this Big Ten tournament, that's a game that could go either way. I think Ohio State could crush them, Iowa could crush them. It's really going to be dependent on how well their support played. And in this game, I don't think it played.
Yeah, but Joe, Ohio State's offense to me is very much isolation based, and Bruce Thornton has never had a good game against Indiana. He's actually, going to finish his career 0-5 unless they play in the Big Ten tournament, which is extremely unlikely. But Ohio State's possessions, I'd have to look at the stats. When Mobley or Royal was the play design to, they were much more successful. Obviously, Mobley ends the day 3 for 11 and 1 for 8, but he also created a lot with 4 assists. And Bruce Thornton just 2 for 10 from the field for 9 points. So I think Indiana defensively did a really good job in this game to hold Ohio State to just 60 after, granted, they played 10 extra minutes of basketball, but they did just score 116 last week. They did a great job defensively, and then, enough shots went down late. Anthony Leal is really putting together a case for all Big Ten defensive first team. He's guarded Danny Wolf well. He's guarded Ace Bailey well. He's guarded now Devin Royal and Thornton and Mobley at different times in this game. And, of course, the big shot from Galloway at the end actually was a shot clock malfunction. They reset it to
20,
they should have reset it to more, and didn't matter because he made it from downtown. But we'll get into bracketology later, Joe. But Indiana is in a good spot, and you'd have to say Ohio State is really right on the cusp right now.
Yeah.
They are my last team in. Drake won today, so there's no bid sealers. But yeah, Ohio State not great. Maybe better that they have to play an extra game in Indianapolis, and Indiana now is searching to see if they can get out of the first four. All right, Joe, let's turn the page to Sunday real quick. And unfortunately, the start of the day was with your Michigan Wolverines. They visit the Zone on Senior Day, and it's Michigan State that punches them in the face early, 50-28 Spartans at half. Michigan does win the second half and makes the score look a little bit more respectable than it probably deserved. But, Joe, Michigan State playing probably their best basketball of the season right now, and I think you can say the opposite for your Wolverines.
Yeah, I think Michigan was repeatedly cooked by Trey Holloman in both games. I think you could template out what I said, and you'd probably find it in our recap after the first Michigan State game. Ultimately, Sean, I think Michigan State, this is a signature performance. They attack the glass well. They exploit weaknesses really well. Michigan turns it over a lot, and Michigan State each time just capitalized and rode the home crowd. I think the first half was the game, to be honest, Sean. I think Michigan State, rightfully so, took their foot off the gas in the second half.
Did it get to 11? It never got to single digits.
It got to 11. It never got to single digits. Jace Richardson, again, I think us picking him at least me picking him on my all Big Ten teams looking better and better. Yeah, both of us, then I should say. Didn't even need that great a game from Jaden Akins. 3 of 9 from 3, 4 of 14. I'm sure wasn't like his most memorable performance. But Trey Holloman, 8 of 12, and that's the thing, Sean. It's just a constant theme. They don't need Jaden Akins to be the guy all the time. They could rely on other dudes. Jackson Kohler's really come on over the years, and especially today. So I look at this Michigan State team, Sean, and there's a reason they're the most bet-on team to go to the Final Four. I said it last time. I'll say it this time. I think depending on the region, unless they're in an Auburn region, which we'll get into later, or a region against maybe a Duke Houston, I find it hard to believe they won't be the most bet-on team within the region to make the Final Four.
So they're definitely going to be in one of the SEC 1-seed regions. Just how it works out.
Like a Florida, yeah.
Yeah, so there's new bracketing rules this year because of the mega conferences, and it used to be that no team from the same conference could be in the same region. Seeds 1 through 4 can't play in the first or second round. Now they've changed that to the first 4 seeds from each conference need to be in different regions. So Auburn, obviously 1 seed. Whoever ends up as that 4th 1 seed from the SEC, teams 5 and 6 are also going to be in the SEC. So, and then they would have to go to Duke and Houston's region. So the 2 extra 2 seeds there would be in the SEC 1 seeds region, if that makes sense. So it seems likely that Michigan State is going to be in either Auburn or other SEC 1 seed team, which is either Alabama or Florida at this point, but not ideal for Michigan State fans who probably preferred the Midwest, and then second, as a secondary option, probably wanted Newark, so in the East. But again, they're in a really good spot, locked into the number 7 overall seed. I can't really see them going up or down depending on what happens in Indy, Joe. And we haven't seen Michigan State take the Big Ten tournament all that seriously when they haven't had to before. And potentially playing a team that beat them already, what do you think we can expect from Michigan State in Indianapolis? They're playing really good basketball right now.
Yeah, whether they string it together 3 days in a row, I don't know. It's not really an insult on them. No. It's just really hard. They've been playing as good a basketball since that Indiana loss.
And they've been playing high energy ball too, like really high.
Yeah. So does that necessarily mean they're not going to do that over 3 days? I wouldn't doubt Tom Izzo. It's just, at some point you're going to be due for a letdown, and that's not an insult at all. I just think I mean, for God's sakes, we picked Izzo as our coach of the year, so we're not doubting him. But it's just going to be tough, Sean. Can you beat an Indiana? Can you beat a 4-5 the next day and then pull it all together for a title game? Maybe, but I mean, there's a reason Purdue didn't win the conference title last year, conference tournament last year. They were by far the best team. So crazier things have happened.
And looking ahead for Michigan, Joe, it's pretty obvious at this point that the Wolverines are limping into the postseason. They finished 22-9. They still do finish in a tied for second at 14-6, but the performances weren't really indicative of the results. The Wolverines were winning a couple games that they probably didn't deserve to. Now recently the results are catching up with it, and with a potential first round game against Purdue, who also is struggling. I mean, what can we expect from Michigan going forward? Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf are awesome, but the guards have really struggled, and that is just not a winning formula in March.
Yeah, this team cannot hit threes well. They can't sustain possessions together well. And God forbid if Vlad Golden's taken away, whether it's foul trouble, injury, or just an off night, this is one of the most beatable teams. And I'm telling you, Sean, aside from Wisconsin really like messing up at the Big Ten tournament, Michigan's going to be the most popular pick out of five or maybe a four, but probably a five to lose the 5-12 games. So beating Purdue, to be honest with you, wouldn't really alleviate my fears because I think Michigan losing 3 games in a row and 4 of 5, sorry, not 4 of 5, losing 3 games in a row uh, been has really been the highlight of the conference. I think Purdue's just as cold, to be honest. Beating UCLA barely at home. I mean, it's impressive to beat UCLA, but ever since then, Purdue's also limped to the finish line. So the battle of Michigan and Purdue might be considered the battle of the mids by some harsh critics. And frankly, it's hard for me to argue with that. I don't think most Purdue fans would either.
And I have Michigan pretty locked into the 5, Joe. I have a feeling the committee is going to, vote and seed them pretty quickly, and especially with Michigan playing late Thursday. No, late Friday.
Yes. Yep. 9 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah, so I have a feeling that late. I have a feeling Michigan's already on the bracket in the committee room before they even play that game on Friday. So it's going to take a lot for me to move Michigan off my 5 seed line. But again, we talked about this. The 12 seed, there will be a play-in game on the 12 line, most likely at this point. And I don't see a way that Michigan is going to be like significantly favored against this 12 seed. They're all really good. They're all winning, and Michigan is not. And Joe, you have to go back. The Ohio State away win was pretty solid performance. The Purdue win was solid, but a lot of negatives coming in the most popular upset pick slot of the tournament, Michigan's got to be on their toes in the round of 64, or they could go home.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a couple other games today. We had Rutgers beating Minnesota in overtime. Doesn't really do much other than seeding. And then we had Oregon winning at Washington on the road in overtime. Oregon, again, was in that 8 seed regardless of what happened. But, Joe, anything to add from those 2 games?
No, Sean. I think we're going to have to get to the elephant in the room.
Yeah, the last game of the day, I think.
Yep.
Was no, I think the West Coast game was.
Well, the most important one of the day in terms of bubble, probably.
It was basically a Big Ten tournament play-in game, and that was between Iowa and Nebraska at Pinnacle Bank Arena. Nebraska coming in on a big losing streak, and Joe, that losing streak continued. Iowa wins 83-68. Fran McCaffrey and the Hawkeyes live to fight another day, while Nebraska, kind of was on the bubble, but without playing a postseason tournament, they are going to miss the tournament. And, Juwan Gary's last home game as a Nebraska Cornhusker, major disappointment for Fred Hoiberg and his ball club. And we thought they were one win away from being a tournament lock, and that win never came.
It's really a shame for Nebraska. They collapsed. It was a calamity down the stretch here. You beat some really good teams in February. You get that win at Oregon. You get the win over Ohio State. I thought it was a little harsh they lost at home to Maryland, but then they quickly come back. They rebound. Tough game at Welsh Ryan.
You're
Sorry, I
back.
lost you for
You're
a second.
back.
Yep. But then just losing at Penn State, not scoring. Michigan was just kind of waiting to get the kill shot from Nebraska. It never came. And then, let's face it, you don't deserve to make the tournament if you lose at home to both Minnesota and Iowa within a week, Sean, or within 8 days. So I thought their Ohio State performance was good enough where if that carried over against Iowa, it would have sufficed. It clearly did not. And Iowa's performance, which against Michigan State, let's face it, was a pretty solid performance against the team that ended up winning the conference. It continued over, and Nebraska's just faded, and that's why they're going home. Iowa didn't turn it over. They shot the three remarkably well, 11 of 28, and that's the season for Nebraska. I think it's a major disappointment because Fred Hoiberg, as of like probably 3, 4 weeks ago, he was in our discussion for Coach of the Year. And now Sean, certainly not on the hot seat at all because he's done built up enough goodwill there, but kind of puts a major stinker on his tenure as of now.
Yeah, some Nebraska fans have been, a little emotional responses to what's happened, but it is really a shame. It looked like that they were going to make the tournament 2 years in a row, which at Nebraska is a really good achievement. That never comes. I'm pretty sure they're going to be playing in the Crown, which is the new Fox postseason tournament where the Big Ten has to have two teams there. So at the worst, Nebraska will be like the second team out of the field in the Big Ten. So they'll be going to that. So we'll get to see more basketball from Juwan Gary and Bryce Williams, I think. But again, a really bad way to end the season, and to not even go to the postseason tournament is pretty disappointing. All right, Joe, we've got the bracketology up there, and then we'll take a quick look at the tournament bracket. Just let me pull up something else actually real quick. This is my team sheet. Messed around with this a little bit the past couple days, and I'm going to show the people what I'm working with here when it comes to seeding the teams.
Yeah, and Sean, while you're pulling that up, is it okay if I read the Big Ten teams in your bracketology?
Yep, go ahead.
Yep. So at the 2 line, we got Michigan State. At the 3 line, no Big Ten teams. At the 4 line, we got Purdue, Maryland, and Wisconsin. 3 Big Ten teams at the 4. At the 5, we got 2 Big Ten teams, Michigan and Oregon. At the 6, we got UCLA and Illinois. At the 7, we got no Big Ten teams. At the 8, also no Big Ten teams. None at the 9 or 10. We do have one at the 11, Indiana, who Sean, as of this afternoon, has played against Xavier in the play-in game at Dayton. At the 12, we got Ohio State versus San Diego State. And then in our first 4 out, it's Nebraska. And barring an unforeseen miracle, it's probably not going to happen. I'd probably give it a less than 10% chance, right, Sean?
Yeah, they're out. They're out. I mean, we've never had power conference teams omitted from their conference tournament. Other leagues have done it over the years. But I would think that's like sort of an immediate disqualifier. But that's my bracketology up there, Joe. But let me bring up the team sheet, which the people can see on here. I know you can't see it, Joe, but essentially it's all their numbers, their resume numbers, their quality numbers, and their quad records. And then I basically put them in order, 1 through 68. You can see the teams that I have and where they're ranked in terms of the field. And there's a couple things that obviously some other things have happened today, which is why this is a little bit inaccurate. But for one thing, I think Indiana has actually jumped San Diego State because of a couple of different things here. You see San Diego State at 43, Indiana at 44. Essentially the same numbers across the board, 41 to 41, 48.7 to 50. Indiana has one more quad 1 win, one more win in quads 1 and 2, and then San Diego State has some Q3 losses and Q2 losses. So I would flip those two right now. Drake has won their tournament already, so they're not going to be a bid stealer because they already have their bid. But a couple of these other things, these resume numbers are more important for getting into the tournament. The committee has always leaned on that. Who did you play? Who did you beat? And where did you play them? And then when it comes to seedings, this quality number, which is your Ken Palms, your Torviks, those better come into play for seeding purposes. But this is very, very close this year. The top teams rank extremely high in the historical numbers. Florida, for example, which is my fourth team, they're the 11th best team of all time, according to Ken Palm. Or not of all time, but since 1997, which is when they first did it. So that's what I'm looking at. There are other numbers you can look at, but really the quad wins, the quad 1A wins, those are things that's, it's very close, and which is why you see a ton of different projections. But, Joe, I'm sure we got a couple of bracketology questions, especially with, 7 days away.
Yeah, I had two from Nebraska fans from earlier. That's completely scrapped now
Yep.
that they lost, and Sean just answered it effectively, so we'll get off those. From Brian, who's a Purdue fan. Brian asks, Sean, does Purdue have anything to gain for the Big Ten tournament? You currently have them at a 4 as of this afternoon. What say you, Sean?
I don't think so. I have them 14th right now. They've got pretty good resume numbers at 17, quality at 14. You already got 3 quad 1A wins, 7 quad 1 wins, no wins outside the top, no losses outside the top 2 quads. No, I don't think they'll leave that 4 seed. Either way.
Absolutely. Yep. Uh, this one from this one from Adam, our fellow Wolverine fan. Thanks for joining on, Adam, even in tough times. Adam asks, Michigan is pretty solid at the 5. You kept saying that. However, all they've done is kept losing. At the same time, a bunch of teams around them are most likely winning, aka Clemson, for example. Is there any way Michigan falls to the 6, including if they lose on Friday?
I don't think so. It's going to be, hopefully for them, it's Purdue. You still got a 13-9 record across the top 2 quads, 4 quad 1A wins. Pretty good 28th in your quality metrics, and let's see, 16th in resume. The KPI is really pulling that up. They're actually 9th in the KPI, and this was before today. So the resume numbers don't take into effect margin of victory. Where did you play? Who did you beat them? That's all that it's basically strength of record. Strength of record is one of the numbers, but that's a pretty good description. But no, I think they're right there on the 5.
Yep.
And something that actually might come into play here is you see 3 Big Ten teams on the 4 line and 2 on the 5. That means there has to be one region which has a 4 seed Big Ten and a 5 seed. The committee might try and avoid that. So the only way that Michigan gets bumped to a 6 is if there aren't any slots on the 5 line that are available for them. The rule for that is you can't be matched up against somebody that you played more than once. So Michigan and Wisconsin have only played once right now, which is why they share the same region. But I know that Michigan has played Purdue twice, right? And then probably a third one coming. You cannot be in the same region as them. And then Maryland, that was just one?
That's a one-off, yeah.
Okay, so they could be matched up against either one of those 2, unless, of course, they meet further down the line in the Big Ten tournament. But that is just something to look out for. If you see any of these wonky seeds, like maybe a play-in game being pushed up to a 10 or down to a 12, maybe it's because, there's a Big Ten team in that game. Say Ohio State's in the play-in game and on the 12 line. Well, they can't play a Michigan if they win, for example. So that could be something that happens, but that's not really in anybody's control.
All right. All that said, got a few more here. From Braden, who's an Ohio State fan. Braden asks, is it this simple? Ohio State wins on Wednesday, loses Thursday. Would that be enough?
You'd have to say that would probably have them about where they are right now, right? A win against a team that you should beat and a loss against an Illinois team that's playing really well. This is something that actually came up in another chat of mine earlier today. And this Ohio State resume is extremely similar to the 2022 Michigan resume, Joe, which saw the Wolverines actually in the field and not even in the first 4. So the way that this is going to work for Ohio State is you see them down here on our sheet at number 48. When it comes to deciding if they'll be in the field, these resume numbers will be there. That's what they're going to be judged on if they make it, which is 49.3 right now. It's slightly worse than the Xavier's. It's slightly worse than Xavier and a little bit more than slightly worse than San Diego State, Indiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas. If they get in, like, they won't be, because they're 35 in the predictives, the quality metrics. So that is like really good for a bubble team. So if they can get in, they might not even go to Dayton because of that. But it is really a interesting case because we've seen a couple teams like this over the years. That Michigan team did have a little more of a couple better wins. I think 4 Quad 1A wins to 3. And, it is just interesting. If they can get over the hump of their not poor resume numbers, they're probably going to be in pretty safely. But, of course, they're my last team in right now. North Carolina, Boise, there isn't really anybody taking their spot or on the heels of taking their spot. So they're going to have to pray for sort of a clean sweep of non-bid Steelers here and see if they can get in that way.
Yeah. That answers our next question, kind of, from Dylan, who's an Indiana fan. Dylan's a two-part question. What does Indiana have to do to solidify their tournament presence? And then the second part of that question, what teams do we have to cheer against? So he assumes Oklahoma, Arkansas. Probably not. You don't want to cheer against VCU, but I'm gonna let Sean take that away.
Yeah, I think. I think if Indiana beats Oregon, it's going to be really hard for the committee to put them in Dayton, because they're a little bit less lopsided than Ohio State here. Resume numbers are pretty good. Quality numbers are a little worse, but yeah, so 41 across the resume numbers. That will probably go up today with how good Michigan State played. And then they're 50 in the predictives, which is a little bit worse than these other bubble teams you see. But again, the Quad 1A, 3 Quad 1A wins for the Hoosiers, and so they're a little bit like less extreme than Ohio State. So I could see the Hoosiers being put in Dayton, but I think we're looking at 3 SEC teams in the because I'm switching Indiana to 4th to last in right now. I'm seeing 3 SEC teams above them that all play on the first day of that SEC tournament, and I don't think any of them play each other, but like they lose, Indiana wins, Indiana's jumping them. It's really close. So I think if Indiana beats Oregon, they will not be in Dayton, and if they lose to Oregon, they probably will be that last team in Dayton or the first team in Dayton, depending on how you look at it.
All right, last question. How many teams? Well, sorry. Last question from Brax, who's an Ohio State fan. How many Big Ten teams do you expect to see in Dayton? 1, 2? Is there a limit to how many there can be?
Well, there can't. 2. Well, Indiana and Ohio State can't play each other in Dayton, if that makes sense. They've already played twice, so it has to be 2. I mean, nobody else is really close to there. But even bracketing rules wise, 2, like, I guess maybe, like, there was a time that people had Arkansas and Oklahoma projected against each other since they only played once. But again, that played rule comes into effect in the first 4 too.
All right. The remaining questions were Big Ten tournament questions, which we will address in our next segment.
But Joe, so let's go to it. All right. Right now we've got the Big Ten tournament bracket. Let's see if I can get this right. Oh no, that's not right. Let's bring this here. Nope, not quite.
And Sean's doing that. Just keep in mind, guys. Day 1. Wednesday games are on Peacock. Thursday and Friday games are on Big Ten Network. And then last 2 days, semi and finals are on CBS on national TV.
All right. Here's our Big Ten tournament bracket. This time it's the correct one. It's pretty much going down the order in chronological order. Minnesota and Northwestern play that first day at 4, I think. 3:30. And then Iowa, Ohio State at 6, USC and Rutgers at 8:30. Joe, this is the first time we've had 3 games on Wednesday, and a lot of people are wondering why the league has decided to go with 15 teams here. I think it's purely like a logistical reason. It's hard to have a tournament with more than 16, and I guess they just, instead of leaving 2 at home, decided to leave at 3. But yeah, to have a tournament that ends on Sunday to start Tuesday, that really wouldn't be fair. Um, so this is why they're doing this. Um, you can't have more than 4 games in a day unless you want to start a game at 9 in the morning, and nobody wants that. Some leagues do it, but not the Big Ten. So that's why they do it. And again, I don't really have any qualms with leaving the worst 3 teams at home. Um, they weren't going to win the league, but that is the reason why they've decided to go with 15 here. And really, there's just an extra game on Wednesday. It's the same tournament after that.
Yeah, and I think it's really unfortunate this year for Nebraska. I can't imagine a team directly on the bubble is going to be affected that much by it. I could be proven wrong, but this is year one of a very long social experiment, for lack of a better term. So who really knows?
And they there are other leagues. Oklahoma is finished third to last in the SEC, and they have or fourth to last in the SEC. They have a chance. They're in the field right now, and then Texas is third to last in the SEC, and they still have at least a half a chance. So, in some of the other leagues, the teams at the very bottom, who are playing in the road uniforms on day one of their tournament, are actually might be in the tournament. So, um, other conferences might matter a little more. But Joe, again, Ohio State is obviously a storyline to look out for early. They've got to beat Iowa. They might have to beat Illinois too. And then Indiana probably safe, but just to be sure, you'd want to beat Oregon. But that's really the early storylines that I'm looking out for in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and Sean, we've seen this at times, particularly with Ohio State in 2023, Chris Holtman's last full season as the Buckeyes coach. Is there going to be a Wednesday team that makes a run? I want to hear your pick before I give mine, but I think there's one or two
Yeah.
currently in my mind.
I think there's one, Joe, and it's strictly with the teams that lie in front of them. And I think if there's a Wednesday team to make it to at least Friday, maybe even Saturday, I think it's Rutgers. You've got USC, Purdue, and Michigan. Like, is there a. I know Purdue and Michigan are good, but they're both struggling right now, and there is a way that. I mean, Rutgers nearly just won at Michigan. They've had success over Purdue in the past. I mean, that's pretty easily the pick to make a run for me.
Yeah, I have both Ohio State and Rutgers. Rutgers, you just outlined perfectly. That's why I smiled because I knew we might have been on the same page there, especially the path given Purdue struggled and Michigan. Those are the two coldest teams in the conference. And only third one might be USC. After that shot, this is my third year in a row saying this. I really think Ohio State could get hot. If their offense could hit shots, Iowa. I think Ohio State is going to be the extreme of extremes here. I think they're either losing on Wednesday versus Iowa, perhaps their tournament hopes coming to an end, or I think they could go all the way to Saturday shot. I think they're more than capable of beating Illinois. I think they played them really well in Champaign, although that's when Illinois was pretty cold. Um, did did beat Maryland, although at a buzzer beater. But I don't hate that matchup. They hit their threes against Maryland, and perhaps they could go to all the way to Saturday. I think they're eventually going to gas out because I think winning 5-5, aside from NC State last year, I think it's nearly impossible to do. And let's face it, Sean, Ohio State winning 5-5 in this context would be a lot more impressive than NC State last
Oh, for
year.
sure. I think NC State played like 2 tournament teams on that run. It would be 4 for Ohio State. Um, but Joe, beyond this, I think once we get to once we get to Friday, we're gonna know the fates of all the teams and roughly where they'll land. Um, we have seen the tournament not matter that much later on. Teams are voted in and probably seeded before then, at least Friday, maybe even Thursday night. But one other thing I'm looking out for in this Big Ten tournament, which is in Indianapolis, which is in the Eastern time zone. How do the schools do that are 3 hours behind? The LA schools, the Pacific Northwest schools, especially Oregon, Joe, who are playing at 9 a.m. local time on Thursday against Indiana. Oregon also played a day later than Indiana and just played an overtime game. So, and then pretty much a road game too. So, a lot of factors are slanted towards Indiana in this 8-9 game on Thursday at noon.
Yeah, that's something I didn't consider. I know you've brought it up in the past. I hoped it wouldn't happen to a West Coast team. It looks like it's going to happen, and luckily for USC, even though they're Wednesday, at least they're playing at about closer to nine
Yeah.
Eastern or eight Central, so not too much of a layoff for them. But Sean, do you want to preview the Wednesday or just predict the Wednesday games before we get to Thursday fully?
Yeah, I think we'll probably get another podcast in, um, nutshell wise, at least, maybe Thursday in between the sessions or
Hmm.
something like that. We'll talk offline, but yeah, again, we talked Rutgers. I would be surprised if they lose that. Um, Ohio State and Iowa. I mean, both teams are pretty up there in the extremes. I agree with you. I could see either team winning by 15. And then Minnesota and Northwestern, two teams that have like sneaky been okay recently, considering what they've gone through. Minnesota ended up with with 7 wins. Joe, that was a lot more than we thought. Northwestern's been playing okay considering they're down their two best players. So maybe one of the teams is going to have to win, and you play a Wisconsin team that just got beat by a team that's really bad. Maybe there could be something in that 12-13 game.
Yeah, I'm heavily leaning Northwestern, Sean. I just think I really like Chris Collins in games like this. Even in his first year at Northwestern, where they were morbid, I believe last in the conference, they still pulled an upset against Iowa. So I really can't unsee what I've seen in the past with Northwestern. I don't think they'll go on a run the way I think Ohio State or Rutgers can, but I certainly think they're good for at least one win in this tournament.
Yeah, and to go on a run, Joe, you got to win the first game. And it might not seem all that likely at this point, but half of those teams' seasons are going to be over in just a couple days, whether they're going to the Crown or the NIT or whatever. That's to be determined. But again, I don't. Ohio State's obviously what you're watching on Wednesday, and it turned out well for them. That's the middle game. That's what is it, 6 p.m.,
Mhm.
6:30 maybe if that first game goes a little late. So that's prime viewing hours for the executives over at NBC. But yeah, Joe, at least probably after, we'll have the Wednesday games, that first Thursday game between Indiana and Oregon, and then Wisconsin and Minnesota Northwestern winner. Um, but in terms of the hot teams coming in, we're looking at Michigan State, Maryland, Illinois, Indiana. Other than that, like those are probably the hottest teams coming in.
Yeah, I'll give a slight shout out just to UCLA. I don't think they're necessarily hot, but I think they've just been better of late. I think they've kind of figured out their mojo a bit. They're a team, let's face it, if they play 4-1, they've beaten Michigan State before, although it was at home, but a really close game. I don't think they're going to really be intimidated too much. I think Mick Cronin teams are never intimidated, so I don't think a Saturday game that's really not going to affect their seeding too much is going to do it to them. Also, really fascinating. A fascinating storyline here, Sean, is this Wisconsin kind of stinker we saw on Sunday? Is that a pattern or is that just a one-off? I think we could argue offline all we want about whether it was or not, but based on Greg Gard's history, I think that's one thing I haven't liked about his tenure. They lose too many games, and it didn't happen this year until today. I mean, until yesterday. They lose too many games they shouldn't, and if they lose again on Thursday, uh, maybe Michigan's not the most popular upset pick in the 5-12.
Yeah, Michigan or UCLA, Wisconsin. If that game happens, UCLA did win the first meeting by 2 in California, so really really close game there. And I don't believe they played them again,
Nope.
so that is something to look out for. They get UCLA 2:30 local time tip, so and that would be what they get the next day too. Um, in the semifinal. So a couple early ones for them. They've had some noon tips for sure, but not as early as Oregon, which is playing. But something to look out for there. And then, Joe, I guess we'll wrap this up because this is a lot longer than I expected it to be. But
Yeah.
it's all said and done. Who's cutting down the nets?
I gotta go with come right back to me. I'm
All right,
between
I'm
two.
I'm going with Maryland. I just think that the path for them is really lined up well. It's hard to pick somebody from that bottom 3-6 group. Illinois is playing well, that could be a tough game. With how, I mean, Michigan State likely, their first two games could be against teams that beat them, if it's Indiana and UCLA. And then, I think it's probably Maryland over UCLA in the championship, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Michigan State, Sean. I just think I haven't seen them slow down. I think it's plausible they will at some point. I just don't think Indiana and UCLA, even though they've beaten them before, are necessarily gonna do the job. And then I think the title game between Maryland. I think Maryland doesn't quite have the horses to contend with Michigan State.
On
I
that,
think the
on the fourth day, maybe third day in a row, probably not.
no that's why I'm picking the Spartans.
All right, well, Joe, I think that is it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of the In a Nutshell podcast, episode 90. Please be sure to like and subscribe and check out all the content we're putting out on Instagram and other stuff on YouTube. And we'll see you next time.